Okay, in our last segment, we talked about the crowd cheered as being a very basic sentence. It has a subject and a verb. I'm going to add elements to that now. The large crowd cheered loudly. Now, this is still a very basic sentence. The subject is still crowd. The verb is still cheered. But I've added two other elements to this sentence. Large is describing crowd. Crowd is a noun. Something that describes a noun is an adjective. Large is an adjective. Loudly is describing the verb. Something that describes a verb is an adverb. Loudly is an adverb. So this sentence contains the four basic elements of English grammar: noun, verb, adjective, and adverb. If you think of the sentence in like a Hollywood movie, you can think of the subject, which is going to be a noun, and the verb as the stars of the sentence. The adjective and adverb are supporting cast. You can remove them from the sentence usually and still keep the sentence intact. You just have the crowd cheered. Adjectives and adverbs tend to be add-ons in the sentence. They're not the essential ingredients. They're the supporting cast. There are other things to notice about this. You notice that you can't move the word large. You can't say large, the crowd cheered loudly. You can't say the crowd cheered loudly large. When you have an adjective, it sticks in one position in the sentence. The way to think about it is that an adjective digs its nails into the noun that it's talking about. It doesn't want to move from the noun side. On the other hand, adverbs are much more flexible than adjectives. Loudly talks about cheered, but if you moved it all the way to the beginning of the sentence, it would still talk about cheered. You can say loudly, the large crowd cheered. However, if I write that, you notice what I had to do. I had to insert a comma after the adverb when it came at the beginning of the sentence. When it came at the end of the sentence, I didn't need a comma. There's a reason for that. If you look at these two versions of the sentence, they say the same thing, but this sentence is slightly more unusual. This sentence asks more of the reader than this sentence does. This sentence unfolds in exactly the way the reader would think it would unfold. Subject with its adjective and verb with its adverb. Here, I've separated the adverb from the verb. What you're asking the reader to do when you write this kind of sentence is read the adverb, keep it in the back of his mind, and then apply it to the verb when he gets to it. This sentence asks slightly more of the reader than that does. That's the reason this comma is here. This comma, like all pieces of punctuation, is a signal to the reader. In this case, the signal to the reader says, hold this in the back of your head until you get to a verb because it's talking about a verb. Again, this is the standard order. This is the more unusual order. They're both equally correct, but you want to help the reader out by putting that comma after the adverb here in order to keep it in his mind so that he can apply it to the verb. Now, that would be a reasonably interesting thing if it only worked for one-word adverbs. But the key to grammar, the key to understanding grammar, is to understand that you can have groups of words working together to do one thing. Look at this sentence, and I'm going to give you a longer version of this sentence. The crowd of spectators cheered at halftime. Now, I'm going to tell you that the subject and verb are still the same. It's still crowd, and it's still cheered. Of spectators here is telling you what kind of crowd it is, what the crowd consists of. In other words, these two words together are working the same way the word large is working. Large is an adjective. Now, I'm going to tell you, we're going to talk about this in more detail later, but I'm going to tell you of spectators is a phrase. Because it's describing crowd, it's an adjective phrase. This is an adjective phrase describing crowd. And the same thing that we said about the word large holds for the words of spectators. Large is an adjective, therefore it doesn't move. Of spectators is an adjective, therefore it doesn't move. This is sticking to the back end of crowd. This was sticking to the front end of crowd. This is an adjective. This is an adjective phrase. It's just a group of words working together as an adjective. At halftime is working the same way as loudly worked. Loudly is an adverb. It's describing the verb. At halftime is describing cheered also. At halftime is telling you when the cheering took place. Loudly is telling you what kind of cheering it was. At halftime is an adverbial phrase. Loudly is just a plain adverb, but they work the same way. This is a one-word adverb. This is a two-word adverb. Like adverbs in general, two-word adverbs can move. I can have at halftime the crowd of spectators cheered. There's nothing wrong with this sentence, but if I want to write it that way, I'm going to have to add a piece of punctuation that I didn't need over here. What I'm going to have to add is a comma after at halftime, because I'm asking the reader to do something more. I'm asking the reader to remember these two words and to apply it to cheered. It's a more difficult read. It's not a worse sentence, but it's a slightly more difficult read for the reader. Punctuation exists for the reader, not for the writer. It signals the reader. Now, I'm going to show you one last point about this. And again, we're just in the overview section. The crowd that arrived late cheered when the home team scored. I'm going to tell you again, the subject is still crowd, the verb is still cheered. I have a group of words here that's describing crowd. If I tell you that this group of words is something called a clause, what kind of clause do you think it is? Susie, do you want to answer? It's an adjective clause. This is an adjective clause because it's describing the word crowd. Like all adjectives, it's sticking to the noun that it's talking about. That arrived late is a three-word adjective. This is a two-word adjective. This is a one-word adjective. They're all digging their nails into the noun that they're talking about. In this case, the noun that's the subject of the sentence. Cheered is still the verb, but now I have a long adverb describing the verb, when the home team scored. When the home team scored is a multiple word adverb describing cheered. Like all adverbs, it can be moved. Now, I'm not going to write it out because I'm tired. But if I did move when the home team scored, I would have to add punctuation if I moved it to the beginning of the sentence. I would have to say, when the home team scored, comma, the crowd that arrived late cheered. Okay, there's one last point I want to make about the discussion we just had, And that is that all of you, because you're fluent speakers of English, knew these rules before I started to talk about them. You knew about adverbs moving, you knew about adjectives sticking, you knew about groups of words working together. And I can prove to you that you knew it. Consider this sentence. The man in the gray hat kissed the woman. If I ask you who's wearing the gray hat in this sentence, you're going to answer the man. Why? It's because in the gray hat is right next to man. The sentence says that the man was wearing the gray hat because in the gray hat is next to man. You wouldn't write the sentence this way if you meant that the woman was wearing the gray hat. You would write the sentence this way. In this case, in the gray hat is talking about woman, so you know it's the woman who's wearing the gray hat and not man. The two sentences have the same words in them. If you didn't understand instinctively the rule that the adjective sticks to the noun it's talking about, these two sentences would mean the same thing. That's the only way you can tell the difference. Now, I'm going to put one last version of this sentence on the board. In the gray hat, comma, the man kissed the woman. This sentence sounds funny because it sounds like you've either got a really big gray hat or you've got a very small man and woman. The reason this sounds funny is that this comma and this placement tells you that this group of words is an adverb. Your grammatical sense tells you that this applies to the kissing. This is telling you where the kissing takes place. It's not telling you who's wearing the hat anymore. You'll read this sentence and it'll sound funny to you. It'll sound like it goes against common sense because instinctively you know what this comma means. It will trump the explicit meaning of the sentence. So these rules are built into your head. What we're going to do this semester is just try to tease them out.